and for East and Southeast Europe. For those of you who have followed us yesterday, you know that we have had packed agenda and really great program with a lot of speakers from Protocol Labs and other Filecoin ecosystem organizations. And if you have missed the day one of our conference, before you get a chance to rewatch it on our YouTube channel, we would like to just show you a bit of a preview of what you've missed during our 2-minute video that we prepared as an overview of what we've heard yesterday. Hello, everyone, and welcome to Filecoin Orbit community event for East and Southeast Europe in celebration of the first anniversary of Filecoin Mainnet launch that happened just over a year ago.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to Filecoin Orbit.
The mission of Filecoin is to create a decentralized, efficient, and robust foundation for humanity's information.
You're responsible for your data.
Make the ecosystem great and in general nourish the ecosystem.
My name is Colin, but as many of you know, my friends call me Protocolin.
And the team and the community at large, we all really believe that information is the most important resource for community.
Now, in terms of collaborations and in general, like if you think about Filecoin and how it interacts with the other ecosystems, there are three main things that you need to distinguish.
The way that you put data onto the network. So just be careful here.
One is basically when you wanna basically source some storage from, let's say something like Ethereum, where you need to use, for example, a Texel bridge, and you're basically authenticating with your Web3 web wallet, and you're then storing some data on Filecoin.
If you look at our numbers today, if you go to s3.tech, you will actually see these numbers we've pushed past these already. So
the second one is thinking about Filecoin as the token, as the value that token holds, and basically thinking about how the wrapped token has value on the other networks and what can you do on the other network with that token. That does include DeFi, but it's not only limited to DeFi.
I really want to give a shout out to all the storage providers that have helped us. We wouldn't be able to do this without all you folks providing us, logs and constant support around like how do we make deal making better. And so in the future, look forward to some cool promotion around like the storage providers and what they made possible.
And finally, the infrastructural side. And the infrastructural side, in my opinion, is probably the most interesting one.
And I'm absolutely delighted to be with you here today at one of the many community events around the world.
That was just a short overview of what you've missed or what you have seen if you have been with us yesterday. And today we also have a great program with many speakers that I'm sure will match your expectations just as yesterday. Just a quick note before we begin with today's program. Unfortunately, we had to cancel one talk that was planned for today about the future of decentralized storage. But we will cover this topic in our final panel that will where we'll be talking about future of Filecoin and what's next for Filecoin. So I'm sure there'll be no content missed. And now to get on with our program and our first talk of the day, I would like to welcome Marko Vukolic, who works as Consensus Lab lead at Protocol Labs, and he'll be talking about scaling Filecoin. Welcome, Marko.
Thanks, Nevenka. So, hello everyone. I will be talking about scaling Filecoin. I joined the Protocol Labs research lab lead, so you'll hear more about Consensus Lab vision also during this talk, and you will hear about other lab members towards the end of the talk. So basically, what are we doing is we are helping Web3 scale. So essentially, as we go from internet and Web 1 a few years ago, right, where basically you can only post the content, read the content that's posted by others, and then in Web 2, what we have currently with the social networks, basically you can post the content, but this information is stored in silos, essentially. So a couple of large organizations are essentially controlling the internet. So basically there are too many icons here for the Web 2. And essentially like 5, we don't have to name them, but 5 cloud computing operators and essentially centralized social network operators are controlling half of the internet traffic, as per recent paper that just won the best paper award at SICOM. So what we are doing in Web3 is like decentralizing internet. So in order to decentralize internet, there is a bunch of challenges that need to be tackled, and this is one of the reasons the Consensus Lab was formed. So the goal and vision of Consensus Lab. So I recently basically moved, just a bit about me. So I have a PhD in from EPFL in Switzerland after doing my electrical engineering undergrad in Belgrade in Serbia. Then I did a PhD on consensus, Byzantine fault tolerant consensus protocols back in 2008, before the inception of Bitcoin. So it's just to find the topic interesting and so on. So for some time I was working in IBM on permission blockchains, but then I got fed up with that and trying to move IBM essentially to move to permissionless world, and then I just decided to step myself. And Protocol Labs came with an interesting offer that I lead Consensus Lab. And since I have a lot of connections with academia, then the goal was really to leverage these connections and establish a truly decentralized organization that would, that we work together as a community. So Consensus Lab will have and has already a few members that are working on the topics I will mention. But the goal here is really, and you will hear more about what we are doing in this respect, to leverage across the ecosystem of research, right? Researchers and community, that we have a lot of researchers, like top-notch, world-class researchers looking into these problems and helping us scale. So essentially what we are doing is we are collaborating with academia and other Web3 projects. We are running a bunch of grants, decentralized funding and incentive schemes, trying to work in open and basically transforming the cutting-edge consensus research into code. So this is not only aiming to help the Filecoin in IPFS ecosystem, but the entire Web3 ecosystem. So this is basically just briefly the goal of Consensus Lab. So consensus, as you know, it is the bottleneck of all decentralized systems. So this is true for Bitcoin with its 7 transactions per second, also Ethereum with about 15 to maybe 20 transactions per second or so on. Filecoin has a slightly more efficient consensus, but not by much. I mean, you can expect, depending on different parameters and like the number of blocks, etc. So you can expect maybe up to order of magnitude better throughput, but not much more than that. And essentially, this is the main problem. So of blockchains as they come today. So this is the throughput on the blockchain. How many transactions can you put in a total order, like block after block, and so on. And even if you have a very efficient consensus protocol, what you have as a limitation is that essentially execution is bounded by, because you need to execute all transactions on all nodes that comprise the blockchain, you are essentially bounded by the performance of a single machine. And when it comes to smart contract execution or just the transaction execution, depending on the blockchain, right? So smart contract for Ethereum, in Filecoin currently we don't have smart contracts, but this is on the way. I will just say briefly something about this. And if you want more details about this aspect, I invite you to join the talk by Raul Kripalani in the mail Filecoin Orbit sessions tomorrow. The problem with smart contract execution is that even if you have a best consensus protocol and you execute smart contracts sequentially, like transaction by transaction after, like Ethereum does today, you're not going to scale well. So this is, in short, the problem that we are tackling in Consensus Lab, and one of the reasons I joined and Consensus Lab is formed. And basically in discussions with Juan before I joined, I was thinking, let's scale Filecoin, let's throw there a best consensus protocol that we know, and we just call it done, right? But essentially, Protocol Labs, Filecoin, and the entire ecosystem has different goals. So the goal is really not to have the best performant, I don't know, Visa-like transactions per second throughput on a single blockchain or something like that. No, the goal here is really to bring Web2 workloads to Web3. And this is essentially the set of requirements that we're working with. And that changes the game completely. So you need to think, that we are supposed to build a backbone and the engine of decentralized internet in a way that currently, for example, Google, like how many Google transactions Google serves or Facebook serves or so on. So you need to put this all together and basically come up with our requirements for Web3. And that changes the picture drastically, right? So you are not, suddenly the single consensus protocol doesn't make any sense, and you need to think about how to combine different, essentially parts of a decentralized system into a single thing. So it's a big project, and essentially you see on this slide a bit of just a summary of our goals. Finality or latency needs to depend on the context, right? Whether we are talking about whether you're involving miners that span the entire world, and then you have, basically speed of light constraints to take into account, or you are doing something on a more local area network and so on. I won't read out all these requirements, but basically you just need to think that, like, when you think about the task that we're facing, it's bringing Web 2 workloads to Web 3. And so how do we get there? Clearly, one single blockchain is not going to scale, as we discussed. So what we are imagining is a hierarchy of consensus. So this is called sharding in some communities, right? But we like to talk about consensus hierarchies, right? So it's in classical sharding, you basically have a group of equivalent shards, right? So shards of same power. But here we are aiming to a design where you have clear consensus hierarchy. So basically, you can imagine that the current Filecoin consensus is going to be for Filecoin ecosystem, the top level consensus. But you also see this C chain, which I will talk more about. And basically, we are going to use other consensus protocol in the decentralized computing ecosystem to strengthen the properties of Filecoin itself. Going down, we are going to shard basically by these children shards. We're going to support the capability to spawn essentially shards from the main chain, and then going a few levels deep. The main challenges here is if you leave the single chain design, of course, you have the challenge of cross-shard transactions. So what happens if as you are sharding the state, what happens if you have a transaction that just wants to transfer, I don't know, from the yellow blockchain to another yellow blockchain, to account from one yellow blockchain to another yellow blockchain, some Filecoin. And what is the security of this? As you go down, like, if on the green chain, you currently have a bunch of Filecoin miners, like how do you decide which miners are going to join which shard, and how do you maintain security in presence of the adversary in this case? So these are challenging problems that we are addressing in the Consensus Lab. But basically, this forms one family of challenges that we're looking at, these consensus hierarchies or sharding. Another one is like what happens within a shard itself. So that depends on these are called consensus proper challenges, and that depends on the size of a given consensus protocol. So currently on the Filecoin expected consensus runs with like 3,500. Last time I checked, Filefox was 3.5 thousand miners. So at the top level, we are looking at anything that, we should support tens of thousands of miners, essentially. And that limits that basically restricts the family of consensus protocols that are applicable to this use case, right? And this is what we called on the previous slide, the Earth level consensus. And then as you go down, then you might select shards that are more geographically, that contain, for example, geographically nodes that have geographical proximity, right, to have a better finality and so on. But you usually are operating on shards that are that have fewer nodes. And when shards have fewer nodes, you are able to pull out performance, much better performance. So essentially, for all these levels in a hierarchical consensus, we are going to pick and implement the best possible protocols for this particular number of nodes and setup, like depending on the geographical proximity of nodes and so on. There we have the challenges of performance, of course, security, and just ease of design and correctness. So currently you don't have too many very efficient protocols powering Web3. They are emerging, but the development is going really slow. So this is one of the reasons I joined the Protocol Labs research to kind of try to speed this up. And this is where, like in these two topics, this is where I expect the research community to help us a lot. And the third, basically, pillar of Consensus Lab research is called scalable execution. So of course, currently we don't have, as we discussed, we don't have smart contracts in Filecoin, but we have Filecoin actors. But these are executed sequentially, right? So as the consensus delivers the single total order of all transactions, they are executing one after the other on each and every miner. And this is the same approach that Ethereum has. This is the same approach that Bitcoin has. And if you're going to scale well, basically you can do this sharding, you can do efficient consensus protocols, but unless you do something with a scalable execution, you're not going to scale in the end the entire system. So there are several approaches that we're looking into here. And one is the supporting different virtual machines. So what's maybe new, I don't know if this was said yesterday or in the previous days of this edition of Filecoin Orbit, but essentially we are bringing Filecoin VM to Filecoin, and this is going to be announced in the main Filecoin Orbit tomorrow by Raul Kripalani. And then Consensus Lab that I'm leading is looking into parallel execution of this. So Filecoin VM is going to be based just briefly on WebAssembly and supporting the Ethereum virtual machine on top of WebAssembly. And essentially what we are going to look for scalability is how you can parallelize execution of Ethereum virtual machine smart contracts, but also like on a lower level, like how do you parallelize WebAssembly code. So these are three things that Consensus Lab is looking into, like in couple with the Filecoin VM team, which also looks at clearly at the execution stage. This defines basically the different like groups of problems that we are looking into. So how do we do that, right? So of course, I mean, we're not the only group in the Web3 ecosystem that tries to do these things. So you know, what I would like to spend a few minutes on just briefly describing technically what do we do to solve these problems, right? Because we already started, I mean, the group started 3 months ago, but we already have advanced in certain aspects. So one of the main scaling and sharding challenges is related to replacing this consensus. As I hope you know that Bitcoin runs on proof of work, and it's energy intensive, and it has low performance. But what it does for that price, it gives you immense amount of decentralization, and it gives you really good security. Like it's really, really expensive to attack Bitcoin blockchain, right? So if your proof of work spends a lot of energy, you shouldn't be looking, by the way, at that as wasted energy, because it's not. But basically tells you how much energy is needed to attack the system. So if you have, for example, in Bitcoin that it spends more than Poland, this only means that whole Poland, if it comes together and invests the entire energy, cannot successfully attack Bitcoin system. So this should just be flipped around. So it's actually, there is a reason proof of work blockchains expend a lot of energy. And then, of course, because they cannot scale, we need to scale them in a different way using different consensus protocols. And in this context, many different families of protocols have been proposed, such as proof of stake and variants of proof of storage that Filecoin uses today in expected consensus. But these are not as secure as Nakamoto's proof of work, right? So one of the examples is so-called long-range attacks, where essentially I'll try to illustrate it here. So you have a client communicating with nodes A, B, C, D. You can assume that these implement proof of stake system with equal stakes. So A, B, C, and D have equal stakes. And as the system essentially evolves, basically B and C transfer their stake to E and F in this picture, and then later on A and D transfer their stake to G and H. So essentially, in this configuration of a proof of stake or just a Byzantine fault tolerant system moves from A, B, C, D to E, F, G, H. And if client doesn't communicate, if this happens like rapidly, and if client doesn't communicate with a blockchain often, basically it can be subject to long-range attacks, which you see illustrated in the picture down. So basically, if the client only knew A, B, C, and D, it will continue to talk to them. But since these guys don't have any stake anymore, they can easily fork this client and present him with a different blockchain history, essentially. So this is one of the main problems in proof of stake. So this is why it's not really easy to. This is why the current systems that are based, like they have proof of stake as layer one, is not as secure as those based on proof of work as their layer one. And this is also why it's not easy to just replace proof of work with proof of stake. And similar, I illustrated this on a very, very simple example of proof of stake, but you have similar attacks in proof of space and proof of space time that Filecoin uses today. So what we are doing in a hierarchical consensus, we are doing one thing. So we are going to scale Filecoin's consensus, but we are also going to secure Filecoin's consensus more against this sort of attacks. So I try to, I don't know if you can see in the center of the screen, you have a basically screenshot of power of miners. So essentially in one of the projects, we are going to anchor the membership of the Filecoin storage power table and essentially like check, you can think of it as a checkpointing of Filecoin history into Bitcoin. So this will be possible in a scalable way, just starting next month when Taproot upgrade to Bitcoin is activated. And this will help us prevent long-range attacks. So once we do this, this will be the first, Filecoin will be the first essentially protocol with efficient consensus that can leverage the security of Bitcoin. And then going down in our hierarchical sharding that I was talking about, we are going to extend basically the state space of the current Filecoin blockchain to child shards that are actually going to act like limited liability chains. So the security of those child chains is not going to impact the security of basically higher of upper chains. So the main chain, if there is a shard spawned from the main Filecoin chain, if it has less security than the main chain, if something happens on the shard or on the child shard chain, this will not affect the state on the main chain. And then you can think if basically users of Filecoin main chain want to benefit of some additional features of a child that child shard provides, or just higher performance and so on, they could basically go and open accounts in this particular shard chain, and then eventually we're going to support cross-shard transactions and so on. So this is just to illustrate where we are going. Basically, if I have time, I will say something about how we do checkpointing in Bitcoin. This is fairly easy conceptually, but difficult to implement because you cannot program Bitcoin. Bitcoin doesn't support smart contracts. You cannot implement arbitrary functionality, but again, with this Taproot upgrade that's coming, you can do many interesting things. So essentially, we are representing the single, like let's say the current Filecoin storage miner table as controlling a public key that's controlling a private key that's controlling certain coins on the Bitcoin blockchain. And essentially, we are going to move as the system evolves. So basically, if we have currently 3,500 miners, they're going to be represented in a certain way on a Bitcoin blockchain. But if these miners change after a certain time, the funds on Bitcoin that represent this current configuration will need to move to a new address, which represents the new configuration. And we are doing that, and in op return opcode of Bitcoin, we're going to store the checkpoint. So you can store a limited amount of data, but this is sufficient to put the content ID, Filecoin content ID there, and essentially do a checkpoint like this on Bitcoin blockchain. Then you resolve when the readers basically want to mount the entire talk about this project take probably another half an hour. But essentially, what prevents the long-range attacks I was describing is that you can fetch the latest checkpoint as the user from the Bitcoin blockchain, the CID, then resolve the CID and get the actual latest configuration that corresponds to the one that's not basically controlled by the attacker from the Filecoin or IPFS decentralized storage. As we do sharding, so basically we already started prototyping child shards based on the Yudico code base, and Yudico is a new notion for, I guess, all of you here, but it's a Lotus slow client fork. What it has compared to Lotus is it doesn't have just expected consensus, but the consensus inside is modularized. So currently, Yudico supports Filecoin expected consensus. It supports not for like just for experimentation, supports proof of work and delegated consensus. So this is just to show that basically Yudico supports 3 different consensus protocols, but you don't expect to find delegated consensus and proof of work in production. These are just placeholders for more efficient protocols that will come. And essentially, we are now extending, so we are adding another Filecoin connector to UDICO before we actually start playing with Filecoin VM. So we are working with Filecoin connectors, and we are adding additional actor that will control shards in the form of the shard actor to UDICO. So this will soon be public. So we have some reasons. This was basically forked as a private repository, but the UDICO is coming to very, very soon. Some plans for 2022. So the first sharding POC based on UDICO and the checkpoint into Bitcoin that I mentioned will be prototyped by Q1 next year. And then the Filecoin VM team is going to, it has its own deadlines for the first Filecoin VM support in the main Filecoin chain by Q1 2022. And then we are essentially merging with the results of Filecoin VM team to support sharding using Filecoin VM in the after Q2. This is not going to see production until Q3 and Q4 next year. The exact, so don't hold me for these dates. So this is just the initial plan. And the exact planning will be announced later on. So for consensus proper, so we're, again, as I mentioned, we're not going to use this delegated or proof of work, and we're not going to use expected consensus for child shards, but we're going to use more efficient consensus protocol. So the choice is still open. So because we have few researchers joining early next year who will help us, who will help the team decide which protocols to use. But there is one candidate protocol which is really, really good throughput with about 100 on shards, which have 100 or so, maybe 200 nodes. That's currently a Hyperledger Labs project that I was also working on while I was in IBM. Regarding Filecoin VM, this is also coming, as I mentioned, in the 2022. It's not directly under the control of Consensus, under the lead of Consensus Lab, but if you're interested in this, tomorrow at 7:15 p.m., I think this is UTC, listen to Raul Kripalani's talk on Filecoin Orbit Global. Consensus Lab is growing very fast. So I joined only basically beginning of Q3 this year, so just 1 quarter ago, 3 months ago. Currently, we have Sarah as research scientist, Alfonso as research engineer, George is our TPM. And we have 2 external advisors on parallel and scalable execution and sharding hierarchical consensus, well-known professors joining soon in November. And 1 research scientist is starting in Q1. If you know somebody who would be interested in, or if you yourself are interested in joining the team, don't hesitate to contact us and apply to us. We are trying to, again, as I mentioned, so the team will grow to like 10, maybe 15 people max eventually, but this is not all our power. So essentially, we are trying to make researchers aware of these interesting problems that we are looking into. So just 2 weeks ago, we organized these consensus days that was according to certain well-known professors in the field, like who is who in the consensus field, and one of the best research conferences that some of them attended, where we had really, really amazing talks. And we have a nice momentum in bringing, in essentially establishing the research community around these topics and helping get the best researchers in academia work on these challenging problems that I just outlined. This is, for example, some of the lists of where participants of consensus days came from. Just to give you an intuition, like which institutions are interested in like collaborating with protocol labs, collaborating with Consensus Lab, and helping us move forward on this field. So this completes my talk. I don't know the concept of this. Do we have time for questions, or this is not the part of the program?
Thank you so much, Marko. We do have like a minute left, so maybe one question, and I would kindly ask our production to put it up so we can see it on the screen. Okay, so how are you looking to balance the barrier of entry against the average quality of hardware you expect on the network?
I'm not sure what barrier of entry means here. with respect to average quality of hardware. So currently, the hardware that miners use on Filecoin Mainnet is not average. The requirements are fairly high. Then for child shards, it will depend, right? So it will depend on the particular specialization that the child shard is specializing in, or particular use case, or so on, right? I'm not sure I'm answering the question, but then I'm not sure I understood the question. Sorry.
Okay, thank you, nevertheless. And if you still have some time, you can maybe answer the questions directly in the comments, since we received a couple more, I believe. But now we have to move on to our next talk. Thank you so much for your time and for the amazing work that you're doing and displaying it. That was Marco from Consensus Lab in Protocol Labs. And now we will talk about business opportunities that currently exist on Filecoin. And I would ask Lucas from Protocol Labs, who's working on ecosystem growth, to join us. Lucas, can you hear us? We're having some trouble with your sound.
I can.
Okay, we're having some trouble with Lucas's sound, so we'll put him back up just as soon as it's fixed.
I can. Does it work? Still not.
Okay, I'm hoping this will be fixed soon. Just a quick reminder that after Lucas's talk, we will be having a short break, and afterwards we're having our final session of the day. It will be a panel discussion with other members of the Protocol Labs team, and we will be talking about what's next for Filecoin, both in terms of Filecoin as a technology and ecosystem, but also we will touch upon the Filecoin Orbit main conference that is happening later today, and what we can expect from the speakers during the 2 days of program. So I believe the sound is fixed.
Yeah,
yes, we hear you. Perfect.
Sorry about that. Cool. Thanks so much.
No problem. It happens. Welcome, Lucas. The screen is yours, and tell us about business opportunities on Filecoin. I'm sure our audience.
Yeah, thanks so much. I think you should be able to see my screen now. Otherwise, let me know. Perfect. Thanks so much, and sorry about the audio there. Welcome, everyone. My name is Lucas. I work on the ecosystem growth team at Protocol Labs. And one of the things that I do in that role is to run our hackathons program and make sure that many of our participants there find their way into our grants and accelerator programs. Hackathons, grants, accelerators are all super important vehicles for us to seed the growth of our ecosystem and connect and empower kind of the next generation of Web3 builders. And as you can see on the screen, today I'll be speaking to you about business opportunities on Filecoin. And I hope this is helpful for all those who are excited about this technology and maybe Web3 in general, but are still kind of figuring out where the commercial opportunities really lie. I've decided to break my talk into two main sections. First, I'd like to talk briefly why fundamentally Web3 business models often are and need to be so different from the successful startups that we see today, and then how blockchain technology really changes the rules of the game to some extent. And then in the second half of my talk, I would like to give you more than an exhaustive list of opportunities, kind of a mental model that can help you think through and identify some of the specific opportunities around Filecoin yourselves. And I hope that you'll notice that I'm personally really, really excited about this topic. So thank you all for joining today. And please reach out with questions or comments. I'm excited to hear from you, and maybe we have some time in the end to discuss a few of the things that I'm going to be talking about. Cool. So let's jump right in. And historically, I'm going to start with some really basic principles here. But historically, the success of any commercial enterprise really has rested on access to one or a set of proprietary resources and the reliance on some openly accessible infrastructure. And taken together, these two things have allowed companies to build and monetize differentiated and defensible products and services. What do I mean by that? So, for example, on the resources side, that could be things like raw materials, relationships, access to production of financial capital, or more recently, a piece of code or user data, right? And on the infrastructure side, fundamentally could be things like roads, education, or more recently, shared internet protocols, stuff like IP, IMAP, HTTP, etc. And these shared, by facilitating the exchange of information across the globe, these open standard internet protocols of Web 1.0 created a tremendous amount of value. However, as we've all seen kind of over the past few decades, the vast majority of that value was captured only through the creation and sale of applications that implemented a given protocol, right? So, like in summary, while they created a lot of value, the developers of these, protocols often didn't capture a whole lot of that value, right? So many of these shared protocols today continue to be maintained by volunteers, open source communities, and nonprofit organizations. Instead of protocols, investors learned that investing in applications, so think Google, Uber, Facebook, produce high returns, whereas investing directly in a protocol generally produced low returns. So historically, really, there have been no mechanisms to capture value at the protocol layer, or very limited. And that slowed innovation at the protocol layer and created room for centralized entities to emerge and capture value. And now, interestingly, what you see with many of these Web 2 applications, what they have in common is their ability to leverage a proprietary asset to really corner the market and solidify a dominant position that often feels monopolistic, right? And often enough, that asset that they use is user data. And as you all know, the most successful business model in Web 2 appears to be the advertising model. And as these advertising fueled and other Web 2 companies grow, their relationship with network participants, so users here on the left or developers on the right, often changes from a scenario where everyone shares in the value that is created, at least to some degree, to something that looks a lot less balanced. And at some point, as these platforms grow, right, like as we move up on that growth curve, users cannot move to another platform or vendor or whatever without substantial cost or inconvenience. And often that's kind of referred to as the lock-in effect. And what happens at that point, as you kind of wander up that curve, is that the platform owners achieve commercial success by exploiting data from users and competing with developers and content creators and other businesses over audiences and profits. And often one centralized entity is able to capture most of the revenue generated, right? So they frequently have take rates of 100%, meaning they don't share any revenue at all with creators, even though they're so crucial to their success. And at some level that makes sense because of this lock-in effect, centralized players have very little incentives to aim for an outcome that would be considered reasonably fair by all parties. And now what's cool and what gets me excited about is that with the introduction of blockchain technology, this really stands to change, right? So as you all know, blockchains reference all the previous transactions and states of the world in an immutable chain of blocks that is decentralized. And these states document the status of who is who owns what, and who has the right to do what, right? So what they also allow for is the introduction of cryptographically secure tokens that can regulate the access to any given protocol and also allow protocol developers to monetize it. And that's really important, right? So with the introduction of Web3 protocols, not only can you facilitate the exchange of information, but also the exchange of value. And finally, and importantly, because blockchains are open source, decentralized, permissionless, suddenly greed, so things like take rates of 100%, brings risk to those that are greedy, right? Because network participants can now fork the network if a protocol developer begins to engage in exploitative behavior. And so the risk-adjusted utility for protocol developers now is highest if they aim for an outcome that looks reasonably fair for all involved parties. Or even better, they could work towards a state where decision-making is fully decentralized and the community defines the appropriate take rates. And the ability to capture value that I just outlined at the protocol layer now creates powerful incentives to innovate on the protocol layer. And we're seeing that a ton, right? Like in the ecosystem. There continue to be in Web3, kind of on the right-hand side here, plenty of opportunities to create and capture value at the application layer. However, the market cap of the protocol will likely always increase at a faster rate than the combined value of the applications built on top of it, because the success of application at the application layer drives further speculation at the protocol layer. So that's kind of like why Web3 is different, this fundamental shift to kind of value creation and capture at the protocol layer, and take rates that and greed suddenly becoming risky. With that, I've kind of tried to outline why that's different. I'd like to switch gears a little bit and talk about some of the specific opportunities for Filecoin. What helps me sort through this like universe of business opportunities, and it's really it's just so many, is to kind of organize them by where they are positioned in the Web3 stack. And I've tried to do that here on this slide as well, kind of in its most basic components. Starting kind of at the bottom, layer 0, you have the hardware and networking layer, which forms the foundation of the blockchain computer that kind of emerges from all network participants coming together. On top of that, you have protocols at layer 1 and 1.5, because kind of like come together, that allow the network to reach consensus and compute certain things like transactions. And then on layer 2, you have smart contracts that run on top of these protocols on this blockchain computer, kind of like a software that's running on a blockchain computer, and that automatically trigger transactions if certain conditions are met, right? And then finally, on top, you have user and client interfaces that turn these complex technologies into products and services that you and I and just end users can very easily use. So that's kind of like how I look at all the opportunities that exist. And I'll now spend a few minutes to go through these layers and like lay out a few examples. But as I said, that can never be an exhaustive list. So I'm excited to hear your thoughts on that either today or at some other point, and see what interesting things you can come up with there. Let us refer to kind of layer 0 and 3 as the periphery of the Web3 stack. The business models here tend to honestly kind of work most like traditional business models. They're crypto adjacent, but they seek to maximize revenue kind of through rather traditional means. So what that means, if you kind of think about what I just talked about in the first half of the talk, is what matters here is access to some proprietary resource. For example, IP or user data, or things like economies of scale, and maybe to a lesser extent network effects. And exemplary business models here at the layer 3, for example, are things like a storefront for NFTs. So that maybe creates with its brand some network effect, some gravitational pull, because people like to go to that place. But the revenue sources here are things such as charging users directly for using the service via one-time fees, subscription, pay-per-use or building hybrid models like freemium, things that you all know. In the Filecoin network, that would also be platforms that facilitate making storage deals, right? So you could see a world where there's a very sleek interface that works on top of Filecoin and kind of builds a whole offering around finding the right provider for the type of data that you're seeking to store. On the hardware layer, which is also part of the periphery and kind of feels similar in kind of fundamental principles, Filecoin might boost the demand for certain types of drives, right, that are critical for network operations. And chances are that some manufacturers will optimize their products to meet this demand, perhaps offering integrations that make contributing to the network easier. And once again, like whether businesses at this layer 0 will succeed largely depends on their ability to leverage economies of scale and scope, right? So can you build a large hard drive factory or innovate with your R&D department to drive costs down? Or do you have some, right, does that allow you to innovate and you have suddenly some IP that allows you to produce things at a much cheaper rate? All of those things are kind of like exemplary business models there. At the core, which is kind of the middle section of the stack, is where things get a little bit more wild and also a lot more interesting, I think. So let's look at that a little bit. I'll start kind of with smart contracts. The opportunities here are, things where smart contracts could see or facilitate the emergence of businesses that allow groups of people to coordinate around joint endeavors. So, for example, forming decentralized autonomous organizations around a body of data that a specific community cares about. So you could think about, for example, genetic data, right? Like there could be a group of people that care about that, the next 23andMe, but kind of storing the data in a more decentral fashion. And in such a model, members might be able to leverage that data set only if they can prove, via a smart contract, that they have contributed to the DAO treasury to fund the data storage. There's also opportunities here for Oracle companies to emerge that use, some kind, maybe even unique or proprietary data set to improve the quality of certain other things. For example, you could think of a storage insurance on the Filecoin network where oracles relay events about certain unreliable storage and automatically execute payouts to policyholders. But really a whole, once again, like there's an unthinkable or infinitely large number of businesses that you could think of here. And I'll talk a little bit about the drivers of defensibility in a second. On the compute and consensus layer, which I'll just bundle for the sake of this presentation, there's an opportunity for businesses, for Filecoin specifically, who offer storage, right? So think of just a storage provider in the Filecoin network, or companies that may offer analytics on top of that data, or co-locate storage and compute. And there's really interesting applications there because obviously you can store the compute algorithm that you're using on Filecoin itself and prove that it's immutable and remains unchanged. So super interesting use cases there. And that, like what's really interesting here is that organizations, and now I'm going to talk about these drivers of defensibility, will only succeed if they really provide access to some utility, right? So for example, the Filecoin network, and are able to drive this defensibility and adoption by building a strong community. And that is why ecosystem growth is such a crucial part of what we do at Protocol Labs, because that is all about building community. And building that community is important because it helps make the protocol interoperable with other protocols. It makes it easier to use for developers building on top of it because you have people contributing to docs or specs. It also could make it more rewarding for storage providers by helping them develop and deploy protocol-friendly technology. And ultimately, it also makes it more attractive to end users and clients and maybe token holders by driving up the utility of the the products and the services that the protocol provides access to, and the token provides access to. And if you really succeed at this, and HQ talked about this yesterday a little bit, is what happens is that the dynamics between storage providers, developers, end users, investors, and other stakeholders kind of compound, and suddenly you have kind of, you're unlocking this multi-sided network effect with very decentralized power structures, and you see this flywheel of like self-reinforcing and repeating cycles where utility keeps increasing, making it more interesting to storage providers, to developers, to end users, and then more rewarding for investors. And what you will see still in Web3 is this winner takes all situation, right? Where one protocol, maybe for storage that provides a certain utility might win, but there's a different to kind of like Web2, where you also have these very strong network effects. You have a very powerful incentive for those wins to be fairly distributed within the community of contributors, right? So take rates of 100% are very unlikely to be something that successfully builds community in a Web3 world. Cool. Here's kind of a summary of it all in one slide, but once again, not an exhaustive list at all, not even close. But I think hopefully gives you a little bit of a mental model of like how to think about that, but countless hybrids, where people also kind of venture out vertically in either direction and try to come up with interesting ideas here. And with that, I'm kind of already nearing the end of my presentation, and I'm sure we'll have some time for questions. I know I just kind of scratched the surface, but if you are interested in building kind of the next Filecoin venture, I want to leave you with this one graphic here. I think regardless of whether it's for hackathons, for a grant, or later when you apply to an accelerator or even want to raise seed funding, I think it's helpful to look at what you're building through these kind of 4 lenses. So much like with Web2, any product needs to be feasible, desirable, and viable, right? Those are kind of the 3 bubbles in the center. There's different ways of calling that. Some people kind of call it product market fit. I think that's probably the most established term for it. Just kind of describing, do you have the right team to build it? Do you have the tech, is it feasible? Are you solving a real problem? Where people use it, is it something that really is desirable? And then on the viability side, can it fund future growth? What's really interesting, like I think in Web3, is this layer around it, right? Community. It's so important that your idea has community traction. So what you're building actually has the potential to decentralize in the future. So product market fit, really important, just like in Web2. But then, if you're in the space, really think about community early on. And, what helps there is also having something that's, very composable. So integrates easily with adjacent communities. So you can kind of unlock or supercharge your community adoption there. And with that, I will close, or maybe just key takeaways, just kind of a summary, and I'll go through this really quickly. You have suddenly in Web3 value capture possible and spurring innovation at the protocol layer. You see that blockchains can undermine the power of centralized incumbents that you kind of see in Web2 today. The take rate of Web2 ventures, often nearing 100%, is a huge opportunity for Web3 entrepreneurs, because a lot of the users don't actually agree with take rates like that either. And at the core of kind of Web3 ventures and of this stack, multi-sided network effects, this compounding wheel that I described, really are unlocked by community traction and composability. But at the periphery of the stack, you see more conventional business models that are succeeding and very much to no surprise. I'm left super hopeful with that outlook, and I think could be the end of surveillance capitalism, and we'll see a lot of new interesting ways to monetize it, and I'm really excited to see what you can do. And if this also gets you excited, then I would very much encourage you to try some of these things that I've listed here. You can start building at our hackathons, and the website is on there, and you're very welcome to kind of subscribe to our builders mailing list. You can, if you're a little further down the road, turn your project into a minimum viable product by applying to one of our grants or to our grants program. And then you could also, of course, launch kind of the next Web3 venture in one of our accelerators, and we run several a year, and that's been super interesting. And one thing that I just saw we put out on our blog yesterday, and I put this up here, is this request for a startup. So very much encourage you to take a look at this. It's both Web3 and non-Web3 native things, but there's just so much opportunity also in helping the ecosystem grow by providing all sorts of services that there's really a ton of opportunity regardless of what your background is, if you're an engineer or not, to kind of get into this space, and lots of opportunities here to build. So with that, I'll close and I'll stop sharing my screen, and I'm happy to take some questions.
Thank you so much, Lucas. I believe we have 2 questions from our audience, and you'll be able to see it on the screen.
Do you think that layer 2 cross-chain apps are good for all the underlying protocols, or they take away more than they bring to them? I would think that they are good for all of the underlying protocols. And the reason why I'm saying that is because they are a fundamental element of composability, which allows us to make 2 different things more interoperable, and thus unlock communities that may have been adjacent but weren't really connected, and now suddenly you get more than the sum of its parts by bringing these communities together. And I think that can accelerate innovation a ton. So I think that's a good thing.
Super. Thank you so much. Let's have another one.
Can you provide some specific examples of businesses from these categories? I think I put some example in, but I guess you're kind of looking for some company names. So I mean, there is, and that's not a business model, but it's kind of making it easier on the user interface layer, things like NFT.storage and Web3.storage, right? So Protocol Labs has developed Filecoin and IPFS, or it has started those, and they're now community driven. But you see that without building things that are very much adoptable by a larger group of people, you wouldn't see these protocols succeed to the extent that they do today. So that would be one example. I think on the layer 0, and there's tons more, but think of something like Seagate, right? So that's just a manufacturer of hard drives that is selling a lot of hard drives because people are seeking to join the network of storage providers and want to buy hard drives, right? So they're also obviously interested in making their technology and the hardware that they provide more easily usable on the network. And then there is all this stuff kind of in between. Protocol Labs as a company is a business, right? That's enabled by Filecoin. So just kind of looking at that, I think is interesting. And then you have, I don't know, I mean, I'm kind of coming from the hackathons world, and I see so many cool things around NFTs, where they're integrated in games, or a decentralized app store. But yeah, there's a ton. And if you want to learn more, also go to just ecosystem.ipfs.io or ecosystem.filecoin.io. There's a whole range of kind of neatly categorized by different things that gives you a good overview.
Perfect. Thank you so much. We'll be providing the links that Lucas has mentioned in the comment section, so you'll be able to access them even after this broadcast. Thank you so much for your time. Do we have another question yes, it seems that we do. Just a sec.
Yeah, no worries. You call on people to start Web3 startups in the accelerator. How connected do they have to be to Filecoin's blockchain? So Protocol Labs, like, we want to accelerate, like, our fundamental mission is to make the internet work better. And we believe that Filecoin is a big part of that story, because it, works, it's an implementation of IPFS to some degree, that, creates the necessary conditions in order to, store data persistently and safely. That said, the accelerators, I think there's a ton of accelerators that are open to Web3 more broadly, but the ones that we partner with have a focus on Filecoin, and that makes sense also because there's specific expertise and mentorship that we provide, that really help you succeed. But even if it's just a small component in there, you're very welcome to join. And we're excited, right? Like, as I said, to see things that are truly interoperable and composable and plug different things together. And we are very much encourage them to also join our accelerators.
Perfect. There's also a lot of pitches from Filecoin Launchpad, if I'm right, on YouTube, so you can check them out for inspiration. Exactly. To see.
Just kind of type in the YouTube search bar demo day Filecoin, and you'll see a couple different examples. And really, like, check out hackathons. I'm talking actually about our hackathon programs a little bit later, and we'll highlight a few of the examples that people have built. So feel free to check that out. I think it's super inspiring. It's obviously a lot of different things, some very far from any commercial viability, but it's just kind of an interesting starting point.
Super. Thank you again so much. And we'll see you in 15 minutes for the panel. And just a quick info for our viewers. So we will be taking a short break, and we'll see you back here in around 10 to 15 minutes. Thank you for watching. Hello, everyone, and welcome to Filecoin Orbit community event for East and Southeast Europe in celebration of the first anniversary of Filecoin Mainnet launch that happened just over a year ago.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to Filecoin Orbit.
The mission of Filecoin is to create a decentralized, efficient, and robust foundation for humanity's information.
You're responsible for your data.
Make the ecosystem great and in general nourish the ecosystem.
My name is Colin, but as many of you know, my friends call me Protocolin.
And the team and the community at large, we all really believe that information is the most important resource for community.
Now, in terms of collaborations and in general, like if you think about Filecoin and how it interacts with the other ecosystems, there are three main things that you need to distinguish.
The way that you put data onto the network. So just be careful here.
One is basically when you're wanna basically source some storage from let's say something like Ethereum, where you need to use, for example, a textile bridge, and you're basically authenticating with your Web3 web wallet, and you're then storing some data on Filecoin.
If you look at our numbers today, if you go to s3.tech, you'll actually see these numbers we've pushed past this already. So
the second one is thinking about Filecoin as the token, as the value that token holds, and basically thinking about how the wrapped token has value on the other networks and what can you do on the other network with that token. That does include DeFi, but it's not only limited to DeFi.
I really want to give a shout out to all the storage providers that have helped us. We wouldn't be able to do this without all you folks providing us, logs and constant support around like how do we make deal making better. And so in the future, look forward to some cool promotion around like storage providers and what they made possible.
And finally, the infrastructural side. And the infrastructural side, in my opinion, is probably the most interesting one.
And I'm absolutely delighted to be with you here today at one of the many community events around the world.
And we're back. Thank you for sticking with us. We are approaching our final session of the day, which will be our panel discussion on the topic of what's next for Filecoin. I will be joined by our four panelists. Lucas, whom you've already met in our previous session. Hello again. Also Marina and Brenda from Filecoin. And Jonathan, whom, he's here. Okay, super. I think he had some technical difficulties in joining us. Welcome, folks, and thank you for joining our panel. I thought we could start with a little round of introduction. So we already know Lucas because he was holding our previous talk, but maybe we can start with you, Marina, if you can say just a few words about your experience and what you're doing in Filecoin.
Absolutely. My name is Marina. I'm part of the product team at Filecoin. As you can tell by my accent, I do have ties to Eastern Europe. I was born and raised in Belarus. Spent some time in Moscow, and most recently, I've joined the Protocol Labs team as part of the product development organization. Previously to that, I spent some time in consulting, in product development in other technology companies. In Filecoin, I work mostly on helping large organizations with large amounts of data to onboard to Filecoin network more easily.
Perfect. We're so happy to have you. Maybe we can go to Jonathan next.
Yeah, nice to meet everyone. My name is Jonathan Victor. I work across product and BD at Protocol Labs. I mainly focus on two verticals. One is NFTs and gaming. So just thinking inside of the Web3 space as an application for technology, decentralized storage is quite important there. And then on the other side, working with Marina and Brenda, thinking about how do we bring more of Web2 into Web3 and who are institutions that can disproportionately benefit from using decentralized technologies.
Amazing. Thank you so much. And lastly, Brenda, welcome.
Thanks. Hi, everyone. My name is Brenda Lee, and I also recently joined Protocol Labs as a product developer, as a product manager. And previously, I was at Microsoft for some time working on product as well, mostly in the Azure Web2 space. So it's great to be here. Right now, I'm also focused on helping our large clients onboard their data successfully onto Filecoin. So it's been quite a journey.
Perfect. We're happy to have all of you, and I hope we'll have a great discussion today. So what I wanted to start off with, so it's been, as we've mentioned for several times during these 2 days, it's been more than a year since the launch of Filecoin Mainnet, and a lot of things has happened in that short period of time. HQ has talked about it, and Marco has touched upon this in his talk today. And I wanted to explore, what do you see as the next frontier of Filecoin, both in terms of technology and in terms of development of your community? And I thought we could start off with Jonathan and then Lucas to give us the ecosystem perspective.
Sure. Yeah, I think there's like many different directions we could probably take this, which I guess is why it's like an exciting time. I think on like one vertical, I think having something, Filecoin is like pretty unique as a storage layer where it's incredibly cheap to store massive volumes of data. And so when you start thinking about who are like public institutions and public interest data sets, there's this unique opportunity for blockchains to serve as sort of like the infrastructure layer for things that typically today just don't have a home. So when you start thinking about like open science and like research data sets, these are institutions where if you just think of like the 2x2 axes of like markets and like public-private, we don't really have public markets, and like that's something uniquely that blockchain sort of bring to the space. So I think one of the exciting themes of what we're seeing right now is just like early adoption from people who typically aren't like Web3 or crypto users, and them for the first time finding something that like resonates with them the same way that NFT resonates with like artists. Here is an opportunity for like a use case that like expands the scope of who is a crypto user. I think the other two sort of big things would be NFTs and like metaverse in gaming. If we start thinking about like how do we bring the next billion users into crypto, I think gaming is, I mean, we're seeing it with like Axie Infinity and like Star Atlas and other projects that are really thinking deeply about how do you build a community and what are the spaces where people have the least hurdle to potentially like think about crypto. They already are like used to buying like digital skins and like tokens inside of those economies, and this just adds an additional primitive of keeping it open. So I think that's also super exciting. And then for Filecoin specifically, I think we have been working on smart contracts. That's something that like is in works. It's like being developed. But I think like once that primitive is unlocked, there's a lot of really cool things that Filecoin itself, not necessarily as a competitor to other blockchains, but I think uniquely for our use case, become much more interesting when you start thinking about how do you write things like specific financial protocols inside of the Filecoin ecosystem for things like insurance, for like programmatic loans. There's just many things that really tie in with the crypto economy that we're building, which to me is super exciting.
Super. I'll have a follow-up question later on, but now I'm gonna leave it to Lucas to give us his perspective on the topic.
Yeah, so for next frontier, I guess from ecosystem perspective, I think of it very like simply as like supply and demand, right? So on the supply side, we have storage providers, and we should do as much as we can to help them, to help onboard more storage providers, to see more geographic diversity, and more, you know, medium-sized storage providers join the Filecoin network, and make that easy. And then on the demand side, it's really important for us to help onboard as many developers and entrepreneurs into the Filecoin ecosystem. And, you know, we're gonna achieve that by making it super easy to join us and super rewarding, right? So, those are like the two key things that we need to solve at every stage, right? So people that are joining us very early need to be educated. We need to help them kind of ramp up and learn what's going on. And then people who are kind of like further down in the line need, you know, more mentorship, a lot of time that we want to spend with them. And the bottleneck for us is really just talent, right? So really, there's the group of, you know, the people that are on this call now that are investing a lot of time in like helping people and storage providers and developers kind of join our network. But what I think will be really crucial is that we empower the community to help with that. And you know, so we just become one of many organizations that really help accelerate the growth of the ecosystem. So yeah, I think that's kind of, for me, those are the two main things. Like, how can we make it as easy as possible for people to join, and how can we make it as rewarding for them to join, right? Like, create the right commercial opportunities for funding, for learning things, and hopefully that will help us over the next 12 months of Filecoin growth.
Perfect. And a quick follow-up to what both you and Jonathan were mentioning. So we've witnessed that since 2020, NFTs served as kind of a funnel for more people to enter blockchain and to get excited about this particular field. So for those of you who are more deeply in blockchain, do you see any other fringe implementations that might occur in 2022 and that might bring even more people into this field? And what's kind of the connection to Filecoin, if such a thing exists from your perspective?
Lucas, do you want to go first? I have one, but...
Sure, I will try to think of one. I mean, I think it's an excellent question, right? Because these kind of things that help catalyze growth, I think the first one was kind of DeFi more broadly. Then we kind of saw NFTs, and they're great because they just help kind of showcase what these technologies can do in ways that everyday people can maybe relate to in a more immediate way than the more abstract concepts that we usually talk about. And it'll be super interesting to see kind of what the next frontier for that is. I'm not quite sure like what it is going to be, but I'm personally most excited if it would be something around like social media and decentralized social networks, or messaging that works decentralized. And yeah, I mean, storage and Filecoin will play a role regardless where it goes, because it's kind of, I'm pretty bullish on the fact that it will kind of become the de facto storage layer of Web3. So anything that happens in Web3 will hopefully also involve Filecoin in some way. But yeah, my hope is that it's going to be social. I'll let Jonathan comment a little more.
Yeah, I mean, I think that actually is a really great one. I think like if you think, so to sort of bridge off in two different directions from what Lucas said, I think if you think about NFTs today, a lot of what actually happens is you've created this new mechanism for creators to monetize more directly with their fans. And if you look at the actual distribution, like what we've done is commoditized the ability for a creator to do that directly with the fans, which is a great thing, but there's still this distribution problem. And that distribution is entirely like Twitter or Facebook, like where are these social like networks being created? And so I think like when you start thinking about how does the stack get decentralized, I think like social media is sort of like one of the really big frontiers. I think the other direction where I think there's a lot that at least I'm personally quite bullish on is if you, like as Lucas was mentioning, like first what we saw was like DeFi summer as like one big trend that sort of like validated itself. More recently, we've seen NFTs as like another trend that sort of validated itself. I think independently, you could look at gaming. So you look at just like, not even like Web3 gaming, I just mean like the gaming industry, multi-$100 billion industry where everything is a closed ecosystem. And if you start thinking about, okay, we know DeFi works, we know NFTs works, we know gaming works, it sort of naturally makes sense that the next frontier is combining all of these things together and having true like metaverse style experiences. And I think if you start thinking a little bit harder then about, well, what would those experiences actually look like? A lot of that really implies that you have content that's like accessible from anywhere. You need to have like no size like restrictions. You need to be able to like support high definition content. You need content that's like quite large, and you need the cost of storage to be incredibly cheap. And these are things that Filecoin is like uniquely positioned to do. Like it's totally unreasonable to have like a terabyte of storage cost $25,000. Like in order to actually make this work, if we want to have 1 billion NFTs, and like when you think of what an NFT is, like there's specific applications of this technology. Today it's art, tomorrow it could be gaming, but I think like the true future of this stuff is anything that can be like a digital bearer asset, whether it be like a vaccine card, a ticket, like literally all the things that we use paper for. Like this is where NFTs can go. And so, yeah, I think really if we start thinking about like what could the future really look like, digital storage is an incredibly important component because all of those assets have to live somewhere, and you have to do it at a scale that can actually support internet scale data, and you need to do it at a price point where it's like actually reasonable to like happen, which is why I'm super excited about the stuff that we're working on.
Amazing. And to quickly touch upon that with my next question. So Filecoin is often referred to, at least by people from the Filecoin community, as future backbone of Web3 or future backbone of internet itself, with storage as one of the most important components and integral parts of web. So I wanted to hear your perspective, firstly, Marina, and also Brenda. How do you see the role of Filecoin and wider Web3 ecosystem expanding on this definition that I provided? I'm sure there are even more explanations on how Filecoin fits in to this vivid community.
Well, just as you said, decentralized storage will be an integral part of how decentralized internet will work in the future. And a number of properties that Filecoin offers will help that vision, will help that direction. First of all, it's the decentralized nature of storage and the open source nature of this tech stack. So that allows developers build their own applications on Filecoin. There is no centralization of who owns the data. So there is really this open access that speaks to this mission of like decentralizing the internet. Second is something that's very important is the sort of the trustless nature of Filecoin. There is built-in verification mechanisms that do allow any participant in the community to believe that the data that's stored is unaltered and it hasn't been tampered with. And there are programmatic proofs that help with that. I think these are the two important factors that would contribute to Filecoin being really the backbone of the future vision of where kind of we're headed from the decentralization internet point of view.
Perfect. Thanks. We can go to Brenda.
Awesome. Thank you. I think similar to what Marina said, I do think the verification aspect is super important in a decentralized web. And I think with Filecoin in particular, one of the things that we really care about and really want to empower are all the different storage providers and the clients that we want to basically onboard onto the network. And I think because it is an open marketplace, that's something that also makes it really powerful because you don't have like a small group or a set group of experts that are offering their storage on this network. Anyone can come, and if there's if you have spare storage sitting around, you can onboard it. And I think with the centralized web, you're going to have a ton of things that need to be stored on Web3 networks. And I think when you think about storage, it's many different things. It's not just like the assets that John and Lucas were talking about earlier, but I think the number of use cases can grow a lot as we move more towards this like metaversy world. And I think if you want to be able to store all of these things, like having that open market and that open network is super important. And so I think that's one thing that Filecoin does really well. And I'm excited to see where it goes.
Maybe just to also comment one other thing, like I think we're at this really unique point in history. And if you take a look at if you look at like Jack Dorsey and like in the US, we have lots of conversations about social media and how to fix it. And it's interesting if you take a look at like Facebook's approach versus like Twitter's like blue sky approach. And like Facebook's approach is like, let's set up like this council that separately can like adjudicate like whether Facebook took down stuff inappropriately. And like you have sort of this idea of like a centralized entity that can somehow like a court of however many people will be able to reasonably interpret like whatever local context, whatever like local laws, and be able to like make that sort of decision versus like a blue sky approach, which is much more like Web3 native, I would assume, like I would describe it as, where it's really recognizing that when we start talking about social networks and social media, we need things that can actually scale. And like the actual local context is going to be really difficult to build from a centralized perspective. And so to tie it back to IPFS and Filecoin, I think one of the most important primitives that we're building is this idea that like you can uncouple data from an application layer. And so when you start thinking about how do you actually build this stack of tools that allow you to have like decentralized social media, that allows you to build trust and safety tools that users are opting into and deciding for themselves which algorithms they want, like you need a data layer that allows people to permissionlessly innovate on like how is the content like passed around the network, like what are the filters that people do want to like subscribe to. The users are the ones who are empowered to make those choices. And so like really I think we're getting to a point where like the philosophical nature of technology is really colliding. Like this is the world that we're starting to live in. And so I think, yeah, as all of these trends really come together into how do you actually have a decentralized version of storage that can actually meet the internet scale of like use cases that we already know exist. Yeah.
Yeah. And maybe one more comment also from my side. So why is it Filecoin, right? Like why is Filecoin the backbone of kind of internet storage in the future? I think like one interesting just stat to look at there is the sheer size of the network, right? The capacity on the Filecoin network is 12 exabytes. That's 45,000 times Wikipedia, right? Like saved in terms of capacity. So it feels like that seems like a pretty good place if you're looking for storage capacity to look at that network, right? It is the largest decentralized network on the planet. That's why I'm kind of like, yeah, like it has obviously it has all these features, but it's also proven to kind of over the past year gain that traction that actually like lets it reach a meaningful size.
I want to just quickly get back to the philosophical side of things that Jonathan touched upon. And this might be a totally cliche subject in your world, but I need to bring it up because I think that we do have a pretty diverse audience today and that some people might be questioning themselves about this. So censorship and content moderating has been a really hot topic, especially in regards to centralized social media these days. And there are people in wider tech community who see decentralized apps and decentralized internet as an answer to more freedom of speech on the internet, etc. But another question that always arises in this type of discussion is what happens if some shady data is stored, for example, on Filecoin, or if something that we all agree should be taken off of Facebook is taken on some decentralized network. So how can that content be controlled and moderated and not turn into a slippery slope? So what are your thoughts on this issue? Whoever wants to go first.
Yeah, I can hop in unless someone else has thoughts. So it's a really important question. And I think like the interesting thing I always think about is like, if you say like individual to like organization, you can have like either side be like the malicious actor. You can have individuals that are trying to store really malicious data. You can also have organizations that maliciously are trying to prevent the spread of information. And so like any extreme is going to be something that like results in a bad outcome. And so the question then is like, what should the technology actually be enforcing? And how do you build the right primitives that allow for like the right things to be expressed? And so I think like one of the interesting properties of IPFS is like you as a political activist can run an IPFS node and you are expressing your values through your technology. And that means that you are operating as a distribution mechanism for the things that you really care about. In the same way, though, like you as an individual don't have to make a binary choice. You can choose what information you would like to propagate and like what you actually want to enable and push on the web. And there's people who are building, and like the interesting thing and how this relates to Filecoin is like everything speaks the same language of CIDs, this like unique identifier of content that can be passed around. And in the same way, miners can choose to like express their own values. They can have lists of content that they don't want to like store on their machines because they like bad bits. We don't have to name specific examples, but there are things that are like bad that are out there. And so there are teams that are building tools that allow people to express these specific values. So as an example, Murmuration Labs is a team that's built something called BitScreen. There's another team called, I forgot their actual name, but the product name is CID Gravity. But really, it's giving everyone in the organization, like at every layer of this protocol, the ability to express their own values. And I think it really comes down then to a different philosophical question, which is, do you think most people are good or not? Because when you think about truly heinous content, there's a very small set of people in the world that really do want to promote and distribute this content. And if you think the majority of users are actually good and are willing to not support that content, then you'll see that content not being distributed. Versus if you are an activist who's working in a potentially hostile arena, it is your political choice about what do you want to distribute. You are intentionally making your own philosophical choices, but the technology isn't restricting you in one direction or another. I should also caveat, these are my personal views. So yeah, this is, but all of this is these are tools that the technology doesn't explicitly put an enforcement on. Every society can make their own decisions about what laws do they want to pass, and then individuals inside of that society should make a choice about do they agree and do they want to subscribe to the laws that are passed. In good democratic societies, I think there's all of those incentives are aligned, and so yeah.
Yeah, and something that could aid these individuals in sort of discerning between even more trustworthy versus less trustworthy sources are some of the reputation mechanisms, some of the reputation systems that we see being built, including in the Filecoin community, that allow sort of discerned trustworthy sources from not based on what has been the reputation of that particular information provider, information source. Again, I think that all comes down to individual choices, but there is some kind of informed choice that people can make while seeing these reputation scores or some history for each information source.
I think it's an excellent question, right? How do we prevent, we have a responsibility, or I think any platform that builds technology that facilitates the exchange of information kind of on a global scale should think about the implications of putting that technology out there, both in the ways it can do good and in the ways that it might do harm. And so I think it's a question that at least from kind of on a meta level, all of us are very much aware of and talking about. And right, so, and it's a conversation that we also for the community to have, and get lots of voices to kind of chime in and share their perspectives there. I think there's also, and once again, my personal view here also, just like Jonathan said, there is a responsibility to kind of do the right thing, and as we build these technologies, be very, and that applies not only to kind of information sharing, but more broadly, what are the values that are baked in, right? And the same is true for the Web2 companies, where good people build products with great intentions, but ultimately the outcome was things like surveillance capitalism and stuff like that, right? Where probably everyone would agree, no, I didn't want to do that, and I never intentionally, this never intentionally was on my roadmap. But being very conscious about that, I think is an opportunity that any Web3 company has now, right? And which also gives us kind of an edge versus the Web2 innovation, which was very much move fast and break things. And I think that kind of as a mantra is a lot less cool today, right? Where people are a lot more aware of the potential outcomes. And yeah, I don't know. I at least see it when I look at my colleagues and the people that are interfaced with, that it's very much something that people are aware of, and more than in the Web2 community. And a lot of the people that are joining from companies that are part of Web2 and some of those adverse consequences, have made a very conscious choice to move into Web3 and fix some of those problems.
Yeah, there's definitely a lot more scrutiny, and deservedly so. It's an important discussion. I totally agree. And when you mentioned going from Web2 to Web3, I have one question for Brenda, who, as I noticed, has had experience in working in more traditional storage and Web 2 and is now working on decentralized storage. So I wanted to quickly touch upon a topic of evolution of storage in general as an integral part of the web. And how do you see the progression of storage, and is decentralized storage the logical next step in this evolution process from your perspective? How do you see it?
Oh, yeah, that's a good question. I think we kind of did touch upon some of the like main differentiators with Web3 type storage. And I think when you think about Web 2, a lot of it, I mean, it's all very centralized, right? You have like really big providers such as, like Amazon, Microsoft, and Google providing these storage solutions. And a lot of the times, in like when you're working at one of these Web 2 companies, Web 2 cloud companies specifically, you're really benchmarking against your like these competitors. And so when you think about like pricing and cost, it's really this kind of like oligopoly type situation where depending on what the other big dogs are charging, you kind of charge that amount too. And I think like, as we know, storage can be quite expensive. And I think as data becomes more and more valuable, when you think about the different machine learning applications that can be built on top of them, we're just going to have to be able to store a lot more data, and also people have to be able to access that data. And I think the cost can be quite prohibitive when you think about the control that these more like centralized companies have. So I think that's like one big thing that really differentiates Web3 type storage, like in Filecoin, where you have a big marketplace that different storage providers can actually set their own prices and make it more kind of like a fair, competitive type situation. So that's kind of one piece. And I think the other piece is, when you think about like, a company like that's more centralized and building out like additional data centers and stuff like that, it's a really big process. Like it takes like many, many months up to like, maybe even years of planning to open a new data center. And I think, that's like, that makes sense. There's a lot of investment, like both in terms of like capital investment as well as just like human investment that goes into opening a new data center, because it has to be of a certain size. You're not just going to open like a small data center. Whereas I think with Filecoin, there's a lot of like smaller people that, smaller like storage providers that can actually go in and, hey, like, let's say I have, like some money and I want to invest in opening up like a storage provider type service, and I can go do that. If I'm willing to go through the setup and go through the docs and do it, like I can go and do that. And it takes like significantly less time than, one of these large companies setting up a new data center. So I think, the power of like empowering multiple people and just like more people to provide these services is also a big differentiator, which is why, as Lucas mentioned, we have like exabytes of capacity on the network. So yeah, I think mostly empowering others to join the network and participate is the big thing.
Maybe to try.
Mm-hmm.
Oh,
yeah, sure. Go ahead.
Just to look at it quickly is like, you look at like Uniswap as an example of like, Uniswap is to Coinbase is like my analogy here, where it's like Uniswap has a permissionless interface. Anyone can list 2 assets and like create a market between them. And like small team of 25 or whatever has had days where they do more volume than Coinbase does. And like, there's a question here of like, what does permissionless interfaces and like interoperability actually mean? And I think that's like the perfect encapsulation of it. And so when we think about like, what is the end game for all of this stuff? Like, yeah, the idea that anyone who meets the requirements of the Filecoin network is posting collateral is going to be slashed just like anyone else. You're getting like programmatic enforcement through the blockchain about the quality of service, which just means, yeah, you don't have to like invest to do X, Y, and Z to like not only set up your data center, but also set up like branding, marketing, BD, all of that stuff. Like that can just be compressed to like the Filecoin network will handle like marketing, whatever, all of that other top level business stuff. And then like you as a provider just offer high quality service. And like you and this network of other folks collectively are like enabling something that's like much greater than the sum of your individual parts, which is, I think, what we sort of see with like Uniswap, and I think is like sort of analogous here.
Rick, thank you so much for giving us your take on this subject. Since we're running out of time and I want to leave some time for potential questions of the audience, I wanted to ask the entire panel to share some of their recommendations for the following Filecoin Orbit conference that we'll be hearing for today and tomorrow. So what are some of the highlights that you would recommend to European audience to take a look and hear during these 2 days?
I'm going to start. And I'm going to start by saying there's so much there that all I'm going to say is like just choose whatever floats your own boat and go to orbit.filecoin.io and kind of like see what's on the program. I will be talking about hackathons, but I have no idea whether that's interesting to you all. So just go to that website and do a little like keyword search for whatever you're interested in, and I'm sure you'll find something that kind of is interesting to you. So no specific recommendation other than check out the website.
Yeah, I would echo that. I think I would encourage everyone to learn more about all the different programs that Filecoin offers. I think we're super excited about empowering our community to grow and help people kind of get more familiar with their tech stack. There are hackathons. There's also a presentation I'm doing tomorrow on the Gravity program, which is more of like a community referral program. There are tons of programs that are running that incentivize or encourage more new participants to the community. And so I would encourage you to find one that you're interested in and attend the sessions that could be relevant or where you can learn more, ask questions about those, so that you can get started more easily.
Any other recommendations or the announcements that we should perhaps look at during these 2 days?
I don't have like a ton to add, but I would say, follow Lucas and Marina's recommendation. And also if you're interested in learning more about like who's actually using Filecoin, that could be interesting to kind of listen to some of our clients talk about what type of data they're storing on Filecoin. And that could be interesting to you. Yeah.
Yeah, no more to really add. I would also say like a lot of these talks are also going to be like posted as recordings. And so if you can't make any individual one, you definitely should at least check it out after the fact.
Yeah, and Orbit is just one event, right? Like that coincides with the 1-year anniversary of Filecoin. But we don't want to hear from you 1 year from now when we celebrate the 2nd birthday. But use it as an opportunity to see what's interesting and then like reach out, right? Like join the Slack, join the IPFS Discord, and keep engaging, right? So it's just an invitation to hopefully we keep the conversation going as early as next week, right?
Perfect. Thank you so much, guys. I'm really looking forward to the next 2 days and to everything that's yet to come. Let's see if we have any questions from the audience. I believe we'll see them on the screen. So in the first year, we had one big Web2 use case, the well-known Internet Archive. Do you have an idea on what could be a similar use case in year 2 and with collaboration with some other important Web2 institutions that need to keep their independence make sense? Let's say Wikipedia, since it was mentioned. Yeah. Anyone who wants to take over can do so.
I can briefly comment on that. So yes, Internet Archive is one of our early adopters and organizations we're super excited to work with to onboard their very extensive data set to Filecoin. Now, the trend that we're seeing in sort of like the types of clients that are getting more interested in Filecoin are the ones that are a bit less archival, and that's very exciting. So we see a lot of scientific and research institutions who are interested in putting their data on Filecoin that allows them to, first of all, get the data producers actually separate data production and data consumption. which is very important for these research institutions, because very often the entity that collects the data is not the one that actually consumes it, and like separating and letting users actually pay for the data and own the data is extremely important for research institutions. So we see a lot of this interest, and so we're very excited to help these organizations not only store data but also helping them integrate this data storage into their existing workflow, so that for the end user, for a researcher, it's a very seamless experience that doesn't require any extra steps or friction. And again, putting more of the humanities' most important information, most valuable information on Filecoin. So obviously, Internet Archive is part of that, but we're also working with the Shoal Foundation, that is the world's largest genocide documentation on Filecoin. What could be also exciting, and the organizations we're also talking to, is all the cultural archives, galleries, all the kind of like the humanities information that needs to be preserved for future generations, not for just decades, for centuries. And so we're going to see a lot of these additional use cases of storage in Filecoin.
I think maybe to piggyback off of that, I think like one of the interesting things here is just, especially as I sort of said at the very beginning, one of the interesting themes is just like, who are these organizations where traditional cloud just doesn't actually make as much sense? And that can be for a number of reasons. It could be because like it's one organization that tends to be like the central like ingest point for many other smaller organizations. It could also just be like these are like institutions that are like non-for-profit, or they are research institutions. They don't have like a revenue model. And so really this idea though of like, how do we actually enable these teams and their missions in a more cost-effective way? It's like really finding like where are the core value props where they just naturally align. So I think it's like, it's both exciting from the perspective of we're building a community of developers that are like outside of the traditional Web3 space, who are coming primarily because like they are underserved by the current technology stack. And so like, hopefully we'll have a bunch of standard bearers who are building and onboarding users of their own, as like these folks are helping expand the set of people who actually can drive value out of Web3.
Amazing. I'm glad we got this question and that we touched upon this topic. I believe we don't have any more questions from the audience, so I would use this chance to thank our panelists so much for participating today and joining our event. I hope the discussion was interesting both to our audience and to you, our dear panelists, and thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, and thanks for organizing it and putting it together. It really feels very professional, and I love the studio background, and I really enjoyed the past 2 days, and stellar job like putting it together, and hopefully was interesting to the audience as well.
Thank you so much. I'm sure this is only the first event for your East and Southeast Europe among many that are yet to come. Thank you so much for making it happen and for participating. And we'll see you on Filecoin Orbit tomorrow and today.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye. So that was it for our first Filecoin Orbit community event for East and Southeast Europe. Thank you to everyone who participated in the discussions and in the sessions. We had a lovely turnout, and we're so happy that there's been this wide interest from many countries in East and Southeast Europe that are looking to enter and that are already a part of the Filecoin community and ecosystem. All the links from these sessions will be provided in the comment section, so you can come back to this and get all the materials that were mentioned and continue to work on your projects. And as mentioned, us as well as the guys from Protocol Labs are here to support you and building your Filecoin and IPFS projects and all the other use cases that you see fit with what you've heard during these past 2 days. I'd like to thank you again for sticking out until the end of our sessions, and to remind you to join Filecoin Orbit main conference that starts, I believe, in about an hour. So see you there, and have a lovely evening and rest of the day.